Hello, Nigel Sarbutts, founder of Structured Mediation, mediation partner to the PRCA, with another episode in this podcast series looking at productivity in PR, and more specifically the idea that is ever more prevalent of organizations, be they in-house teams or agencies, being asked to do more with less. And that my take on this is that tools and processes and bits of software that help productivity are part of the issue, and that maybe if you want to take one barnacle off the boat to improve productivity, it would be look at the relationships between people in the workplace and friction and resentments that grow up when people are under stress. And clearly there is a mental health crisis in PR, according to the data from CIPR and PRCA. And to talk about that and explore some of those issues, I'm joined today by Sonya Cullington, who is a cyber psychologist. And I will not dare to try and explain what a cyber psychologist does or describe the work that she does. But I want to start by asking Sonya to explain how she got into the role that she does and broadly what she does in terms of helping organizations work with processes, specifically AI, and to think about what's working and what's not. So, Sonya, welcome. What does a cyber psychologist do?
Good question. So I spent around 25 years in health communications and digital transformation. And most of that time, I was watching what actually happens when you put digital tools into pressured human systems.
Right.
So it definitely wasn't what the vendor promises, but it was what actually happens on the ground. And that shaped everything I think about really in terms of AI productivity and the behavioral realities that kind of neither the research papers or the leadership frameworks tend to capture. So when I work with teams, I'm working with them on what the technology is doing to people when it's deployed at scale rather than what it's doing to workflows.
Okay, right. So you're seeing this at a macro level in organizations rather than helping a particular team adopt a particular tool or a particular practice. Would that be fair to say?
So yes and no. So it's I kind of straddle both ends of that. So yes, I look at it at macro level in terms of what's the conditions that the organization is currently working within, what are the teams currently structured, and how does that manifest itself in its day to day. But also if you're going to look at deploying digital transformation tools or AI essentially in this day and age, then what does that look like for teams, and where are they in terms of cognitive load, critical thinking skills, judgment development, and where does this kind of lots of people talk about that human in the loop, which is a phrase I'm not a huge fan of. Okay. So I like to kind of think of it as more human in the lead rather than this kind of human in the constantly on and available never-ending loop. So that's kind of where I look in. What are the conditions that we're putting our people in rather than just submitting tools into teams and getting them to do the work quicker and faster, but faster isn't always better in my opinion.
Yeah, that was something that I think you said on LinkedIn, which really brought me to thinking, well, it'd be great to hear your voice on this. Of that faster it's a false measure. It doesn't measure anything. I mean, it measures speed, but not direction or anything else. It's just a number.
It's the same as work smarter, not harder, or work harder, not smarter. But it's nonsense. It's just, what do we mean by that? It's just gobbledygook.
Okay. And how have you seen teams always kind of being told, go and find the tool, go and find the process that will make your life better? How have you seen teams respond to that when they've gone out into the marketplace, they've done an assessment of vendors or reviewed tools or whatever it is, and said, okay, let's go and buy that, and our lives will be better. What's been the outcome, do you think, of adoption from the team perspective? user perspective?
So I work predominantly in the public sector, and in the public sector, lots of organizations have industry relationships, and that means that lots of teams have been given a tool that's been incorporated into their workflow, and essentially, lots of them have said, oh, well, there's if you go onto this portal, there's some self training on there, you kind of do it in your own time, or just learn your way around it, it'll be fine. But it's amazing, it's going to save us all this time, and we'll all be finishing at 3 o'clock and we can enjoy the British weather every day. But it's a false promise. It's just a misnomer, and it what I see then essentially is this productivity paradox that I think there was recent research on that basically talks around people start doing a lot more. And that's why I talk about, faster isn't better, because people start doing a lot more. It's actually people are doing all of the things. AI gives you that innate ability to do lots more different things that you wouldn't necessarily have taken on 5-10 years ago. But it gives you the ability to do that now. And whether you're doing them well or not is a different debate. But that means that you're just doing more stuff. You're in this constantly never-ending loop. You're in a position where you very rarely say no to something because it's doable now. So if I take the example of, oh, well, we need to do some stakeholder mapping. Well, that's fine, because we'll just shove our data into, AI, and it will give us that in an hour, and we'll just base it off that and we'll just do it. So great, we don't need that half a day session with the team anymore to chat about it, to go back and forth on it. What does this mean? Are we going to dive into it? Let's look at the nuances. It's all there. It just gives us that output. And the people are relying on that output as, okay, well, this is what it says, so let's go and do X, Y, and Z with it, rather than having the ability and the confidence and the environment within your team to be able to critically think about that output. What does that mean? And to treat AI as more of that thinking partner, and to do a bit more of that, that debate with it, rather than just taking it and just going, well, this is what it said, and therefore that's where we're at, because we're reducing that friction. And friction, it's a signal there, and that's what we need to keep in within our teams and within our as individuals, but also as a whole team environment. This is what makes us work. People are passionate about the things that we do, especially in comms and PR and all those other creative industries. We can't just rely on outputs, and critical thinking and judgment skills are one of the things that I focus on when I'm working with teams around how do we keep that in the age of technology just spouting us out answers.
And did I understand, when you use the word friction, did I understand that to mean friction as a good thing, that that creates heat, literally, in the physics of it, and it sparks, and people saying, well, no, I think you're wrong, and then nutting out what the truth of the matter is, right? That's really interesting.
Absolutely.
You think of friction as a bad thing, people, particularly in the context of productivity, is, well,
I think if you treat a lot, exactly. And I think lots of people treat friction as something to be engineered away. But actually, sometimes friction is the signal. It's telling you that something isn't clear, or that trust has broken down, or that the workload is genuinely unsustainable. So when you remove that too quickly with a new tool or a process, or a new productivity system, you lose the information that it was carrying.
That's a really interesting thought. I never, like I say, I never thought of friction as a necessarily something to be embraced, but it's a necessary part of life. And in the first episode of this podcast, Stephen Waddington talked around AI, and without putting words in his mouth, it was around, we need to use AI to swim upstream. Is to the space created by those efficiencies allows us to be more strategic, or to think about things in the round. And I get a sense from what you're saying is that task that used to take us 3 hours now takes 5 minutes, and that time saved, that 2 hours 55 saved, we're frittering it away. we're kind of reaching for, we're filling that void of time with stuff rather than thinking around, okay, well, now we can become, the great thinkers, the great strategists that we always hope to be. And I just wonder which way you see the tide turning on that. Are you team Wobbs or are you team?
You're pitting us against us each other now, Nigel.
I'm not trying to set you up. I think about, because I'm a million years old. I remember when PowerPoint came in. And suddenly stuff, meetings and stuff, you would turn to this new toy you had, and people, and we all still do it. We highly paid people spend hours peddling around trying to find, a particular image on Unsplash or wherever, doing essentially low grade admin clerical work because it's a free tool that we've got. And, no doubt you or certainly I did it this morning. I became my own travel agent, going and finding a hotel, going and finding a flight and stuff like that, because the tools have made what used to be a closed off piece of work that you paid to have done for you is now available to you. But now you become, the flat pack furniture constructor. And, it's that hidden cost of work that AI is, I feel, is multiplying at scale. And human beings tend to find easy routes or to choose easy things to do rather than hard things to do if they can. So just wondering where your mind goes on that idea. I mean,
I'm not anti-AI by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that maybe we're misreading the problem because efficiencies aren't translating into fewer hours worked, and they're not translating into more of a sense of control over our working time or our workloads, in the broader sense. And that's not the tools problem. Essentially, the tools aren't failing. They're doing exactly what they were designed to do, and they're making it easier to start those things, as you just talked about, being your own agent for travel agents. That's something that cognitively you would have offloaded to somebody else who's spent their career learning how to do that, in a particular way, giving you the best value for money, etc. But you can do that in your own time. And some people find that quite liberating to be able to do that. They find it quite sort of really helpful because they want to deeply dive into that and kind of understand it and feel a bit more in control of that. But in the workplace, that's not necessarily how it plays out. And so I think what we start to see is that when people do more of those things, and I think it was the Berkeley research that said it recently, which was you feel capable and you feel fast and efficient and in a flow. But when you step back and look at that, you're busier, you're more stretched, and you're less able to switch off. So I think their line was great. And it was kind of, and I hope I'm not going to butcher it now, but I think it was the minutes are great, but the weeks are worse. And that's not a technology adoption problem. It's more around a behavioral reality that kind of we're not designing for when we add, digital technology and AI into our working lives.
Yeah, and I suppose in comms, which I think of as, people, is it a trade, is it a profession? I think of it more as a craft. That, it's something that you put a lot of emotional intelligence into the job, and
absolutely.
And you feel that you are producing something. And that if a lot of that mental effort has been replaced by black box technology, that you can get the same result, but with no emotional input, then, I guess it's...
Well, the emotional input, I'd argue, has been anxiety, because people are working with systems that they either don't trust, they don't fully understand, and they're not, we see this paradox that kind of this is meant to be saving us all this time and freeing us up from all that admin, when actually what we're doing is we're just getting really stressed about using it, and we're often not in environments where we can say, I have no idea what this is supposed to be doing, or actually I'm doing a whole load more stuff and nobody's supporting me and saying no to that client, no one's pushing back, no one's doing on the mission creep and all of that type of stuff that we get. Who's protecting that time? Because I'm just doing more of the same stuff than I want. I don't have any free time that people keep telling me is going to come when I use AI.
So which kind of suggests that the issue is one of leadership and culture, that that the organization has provided the tools, but they've also provided that pathway to anxiety and feeling on a different shape of hamster wheel, but still on the hamster wheel. But in actual fact, but not really knowing why they're doing the work or why the results are how they are. And that that's something for leaders to reflect on. Why have they chosen those tools? Why have they chosen to adopt AI in the way they have? Because if it's generating anxiety and uncertainty about whether the answer is right, then to that point around, the minutes are good, the hours are bad. You go at the end of the week, you go, here we are, we're recording this on a Friday. You look back on your week and think, I don't know what I did.
Exactly.
What was that all about? I had loads of data was spat out of a system, but I didn't quite understand why. And this is something that I was reading about this week around particularly AI in education, is that the work is the education. It's wrestling with that essay problem or trying to solve that maths equation is the education. And just simply getting the answer isn't, you haven't, you learned literally nothing. So you're endlessly hollowing out your skill set, and time is ticking by. But I realise I'm talking a lot, and I want to ask you the questions around that. But just on that leadership piece, are you seeing any kind of buyer's remorse or a revision of AI adoption in the organization as those anxieties or that uncertainty has started to emerge in teams?
I think, you yourself have talked about kind of the stress rolling downhill from leaders and kind of breeding resentments and, clients notice and the cycle renews and all of that type of stuff. And that loop, I think, is real. I've seen it. But I think by the time that conflict becomes visible, for me, the damage is, that's quite a heavy word, but the damage is already done, because what happens first is actually what I refer to as quiet failures. So they're the people who work around the systems because they either don't trust them or don't quite understand them. They're the ones that stay quiet in meetings, and they're doing the minimum that keeps them safe. So you've got no friction, nobody's complaining about everything's great. But they've already kind of checked out. And that's, I think, is months of lost capacity and capability before anybody names it as a problem. And that, for me, is where it kind of surfaces, and it's not where it started. So I think lots of people start to think around, actually, maybe we should probably do some training. And that, for me, feels a bit knee-jerky when leadership realize that people have got these workarounds. They're not quite using the system like they thought it did, because they're measuring, efficiency, and all their dashboards are green because everyone's logged in. Then people realize actually that it's not quite how they thought it was. They go, okay, let's get some training in. And they get somebody in, and everybody sits, in a boardroom or in a big meeting, and they go off site, and it's amazing because we're going to show you some whizzy demos of how great it all is. And then you go off and back to the office, and how do I implement that? Like, where does that fit into my workflow? And
Yeah.
where is it for me? And that's where there's a huge disconnect between, the shiny demos of what you can get on your training plans, and where does it really add value to an individual's productivity in the working day.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what would your advice be to an organization saying, okay, we're getting this tidal wave of productivity demands at us,
Mm.
everybody, it's the law that we have to talk about AI in every conversation now, so we need to go and do a scope out of what's available. How would you advise an organization to go about that process? To think about, it goes beyond the implementation phase or that first onboarding week or two where the vendor is still hanging around and supporting you. But then that opportunity, that window shuts pretty quick, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And you're left
absolutely.
behind. So
Mm.
what would your kind of broad advice be to an organization in that situation of wanting to avoid that kind of, we bought the shiny thing, but nobody's really using it, or they're using it to 10% of its capability?
Mm. I mean, I don't claim to have any silver bullets here, but
No.
I think there's probably an element around being honest around the conditions that people are working in already,
Mm,
um, and what that looks like for the team. So I don't think individuals and teams can fully protect themselves from the inherent structural pressures that come with roles like comms and PR.
mm,
Um, but I believe we can build the conditions that make them a bit more resilient to that. I think the things that I would focus on was probably be more clear about getting clarity over volume. So
right.
admit if the teams I've worked with, I'd argue that most of those teams aren't drowning in work, they're drowning in ambiguity. And I think that means being really unclear about the priorities, sort of the briefs that keep shifting, the tools that produce that more output without reducing the decisions that you have to make. And that's really exhausting, and it's really hard for teams to name. So when you have an open conversation about that, it kind of really helps just understand where the entire room is at.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is around a perceived control. So people can handle a heavy workload if they feel like they have some say in how they manage it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think what wears people down isn't being busy, it's the
Yeah.
feeling that things are just happening to them. And that is where the badly implemented AI can cause real harm. Because if
Right.
people don't understand what the tool is doing, why, and it doesn't actually lighten the load, it's just adding that new level of anxiety that I mentioned earlier. And
Yeah.
then I think that thing that I'd advocate for first is kind of teams is the vision from leadership, because teams watch what leaders actually do, and
Mm,
it's not, as we know, it's not what they say in the all hands meetings or the town halls. If someone tells their team that well-being matters, but then they're emailing at midnight, or they never push back on that client scope, and all of those things, they never say no to anything, people will see that. And I don't think that's the thing, that's anything about conflict. I think that's a real trust issue. And I think
mm,
for me, those three things need to, you as an organization, you need to be really clear on where you are on those three elements before you then start introducing something like a digital transformation or an AI tool. Because if you haven't got those conditions, then people feel safe, and in that right environment, then you're not going to be able to, when your AI lands, you've already created that negative friction rather than the positive friction we talked about earlier.
yeah. And I guess overlaid with that is that sense that AI will be replacing people's jobs
Yeah.
in time. So it's like kind of welcome our new overlords, who will, we're
Yeah.
not going to tell you what they do or why we're doing it, or it's all a bit unclear. We're not certain what you're supposed to be doing. But in a year's time, you might not be here anyway. And people are not going to lean into that. They're not going to go, oh, great, the new thing has arrived, the new
Yeah.
thing that is potentially a direct threat to my livelihood.
Yeah, and nobody's kind of taken anybody through that conversation. There's not been a space to be able to say that, a psychologically safe space to be able to say that openly and honestly without it being, career limiting. People just check in and check out, and adoption is shallow and people just go through the motions. It doesn't, the cognitive load doesn't go down. It's just shifting the shape of it.
That's a fascinating thought, really interesting, and I'm really pleased to get the perspective of somebody who has had a career in comms but now is outside of the space, because I think that we're all guilty of being a bit insular at times, but so I'm really pleased to get your perspective, and to have spoken to my first cyber psychologist. But are there any particular people that you follow, any books you've read, or any source of information that people watching this could go, that was, that's some light bulbs have gone off in my head. I need to dig deeper into this. Are there any people that you particularly recommend as authoritative in this, apart from yourself?
Gosh, there are lots of behavioral scientists out there who are doing amazing work. As far as I know, I'm the only cyber psychologist in the UK with a background actually in health. So, which is a bit of a lonely space. If there is anybody else out there, please do come and say hello. So that'd be nice to see.
Okay.
But I think there are lots of incredible behavioral scientists out there who are doing some really interesting work around how AI adoption is looking. You can kind of go to the King's Fund and the Health Foundation, and lots of other organizations, but I'm watching them with interest because as a cyber psychologist, my take isn't purely about behavioral science. It's about behavioral science that changes when we add it to technology, which is a different lens. And I think I'm watching it with slight interest to see how they're comparing things to kind of what my experience is. So I'm still learning in this field as well, 3 years in, and I'm still learning on it. But there are a ton of people, I couldn't name anybody off the top of my head. Sorry about that.
No, don't worry. Well,
I name anyone off the top of my head.
Perhaps it's something that we can put in the in the podcast notes when they go out. And but in the meantime, thank you so much for your input. It's been really, really interesting, and what an amazing career I think you have ahead of you. I think the demand for what you do is going to just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So good luck to you.
I hope so. If people stop looking at the shiny demos.
Look beyond the demos. Ask the difficult questions. So,
yes.
That's great. Thank you, Sonya, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Nigel.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.